I'm really, truly delighted to have a chance to talk to Hattie Naylor, who's here in Cascina. And tonight is the premiere in Cascina of her play Ivan and the Dogs. And she has agreed to answer a few questions. And then the first question is probably a rather obvious one, but I mean, this is such an incredible story, the story that you dramatize in your play about this 4-year-old boy managing to survive in Moscow, in a post-perestroika Moscow, on the mean streets of Moscow, by actually living with a pack of dogs. And it's a story that had quite a lot of resonance at the time when it became known, and it's been, I believe it's been fictionalized in different media and also in different modes, ranging from the documentary to the fictive. But I wanted to know, what was it that drew you to this story in the first place?
Well, for me it was, I guess, an archetypal story. It's a very old story. It's Jungle Book gone wrong. It's Romulus and Remus. It's very, very ancient, and it's about our very complicated relationships with animals. You know, we sort of love them and we eat them. You know, it's to do also with something very magical in the middle of the story, to do with somebody only surviving, to do with their support and arguably even love from these animals that adopt him. What's interesting about dogs is that dogs are really loyal.
Yeah.
And part of the research, I spoke to somebody called Sean Ellis, who is English, and he spends about 6 months of his life living with wolves. Wolves have a much more hierarchical, strict pack mentality than a dog. And I asked him what he found hardest about coming back into human society. And he said, the thing is that we lie. And dogs don't lie. You know exactly where you are with a dog, you know exactly where the hierarchy is in a dog. They're totally loyal. I mean, they're xenophobic to anyone outside of the pack, but inside the pack, you all stick together. And the hardest thing was to readjusting to how we lie. At the same time, I did lots of research for this, and one of the more interesting books I read was something called The Philosopher and the Wolf, which is by an academic, an American academic called Mark Rowlands. And he also talked about how, arguably, one of the reasons why we have succeeded as a species is to do with our ability to deceive, and sapiens or sapiens trick one another. So monkeys, chimpanzees are documented as being able to trick one another. And also, but creativity comes out of the ability to deceive. And actually the very ability that we have to, our technological advances, the way that we can create art, the way that we can create beauty, the way that we can destroy as well. Obviously that goes hand in hand, particularly with technology and the way that we dominate the planet now, is to do with the ability to deceive. So it can be a positive thing as well as a negative thing. Whereas of course dogs have stayed sort of the same. They've stayed being pack animals, you know, they haven't evolved in the same way that we have and as quickly as we have. And all of that is fascinating, that this little boy, this 4-year-old, managed to survive due to a pack mentality, due to something sort of older inside us, to do with loyalty.
But very basic, if you want, drives, human drives that maybe we should, in a way, go back to if we are to live.
Yes, if we should live peacefully and successfully. Yes, which we're not really doing at the moment.
Because everything becomes so simple in the kids' eyes. I mean, this world is no longer complicated. I mean, the basics are all there, and they're quite easy to look at once you look at the world through his eyes.
Yes.
Right. His point of view makes everything much, in a way, much simpler.
Yes.
And I think this is also the power of your play comes from the fact that you adopt this point of view.
Yes.
And it's so disarming, I mean, about all sorts of conflicts and struggles and difficulties.
Yes. But the play is also about what happens when society completely breaks down, you know. So this happened in 1998 when Soviet Russia collapsed overnight. People lost their savings overnight. And it's the same time that Yeltsin stands on the tanks and stops a bloody coup from happening in Russia by doing so. And what's interesting about that, and I think how it's related to the many countries that it's been performed in, is to do with the fact that when society completely collapses, it's the most vulnerable that suffer. So it's the children and it's the pets and it's the elderly that really suffer that, or people with disability. It's those people that suffer in that complete collapse. It's done particularly well in South America, where it's had a number of productions in a variety of countries there. And I think that's connected with the fact that those countries have, in recent history, have been through such murderous military coups there. So they really responded to Ivan and the Dogs and that total collapse in society that it's depicting, where the very vulnerable are completely at the whims of what's going on in society, with nothing left to sort of hold them or reach them. A friend of mine recently did a workshop of it in Ukraine, and I think it's not gone to any of the. Oh wait, no, there's been a performance in Tbilisi, but it's not gone to Russia itself. And she was asked a very interesting question about why I didn't place it in England. And because it's not believable in England. We still haven't sort of got to a place of that level of collapse, you know, which still might be our future. I don't know, maybe after Brexit sometime. But it's interesting to see what countries have really taken hold of it. I'm really struck by that. It did very well in Georgia, and it's done very well in South America, and I'm sure that's to do with the fact that it's closer to home, that sort of collapse.
But I think, I mean, yes, I can perfectly see that, but the play also raises some more general, maybe universal questions about, for instance, what makes a place your home? What is it that constitutes a family? What is it that makes you a parent? So, and I think that these issues may be very relevant to definitely to 2018 Italy, so where the play is going to be performed now. And I was wondering whether these were also some of the issues that you were thinking of as potentially resonating with the context where it was originally produced. I mean, we don't think of our societies as being at that point of, of collapse, but still there are some very pressing ethical issues, I think, that the play raises.
Yes, but there's been a breakdown of the family, you know, and his stepfather has made it impossible for him to stay at home, because he's not his stepfather's son. So his stepfather is obviously not it's not his son, and so he resents the little boy living in the house. There's also a degree of alcoholism that's going on inside that house as well, making it untenable for Ivan to carry on living there. And in my version of events, and there is some suggestion that Ivan walked out of the house rather than being thrown out of the house. It's very unlikely for a 4-year-old to do that, but in my version I put him walking out of the house because that makes him a very unusual and very brave child. And I've depicted it as a child that has never known love within the breakdown of that family. We don't know, his actual father never closed the drum. We don't know what has happened to his legitimate father, and what the dogs teach him. And it was quite interesting when I was doing it in Britain. There was a suggestion that when we first did it in the UK, there was a feeling, I think, amongst the original creative team that the dogs had taught him survival, and I never felt that was true. I mean, they do teach him survival, but actually what they really teach him as regards what he feels as a 4-year-old is love.
Yes.
And is the family home and trust. And you know, there's a whole debate, isn't there, about whether or not animals love us back, and I think that's sort of, in a sense, a red herring. The thing is that he thinks that they've taught him love.
Yes.
And he thinks that they've taught him loyalty, and that's what matters. And there's, you know, there's a whole load of research about how you get people out of depression, how you mend some of the tragedies that happen to the human heart. And a lot of that is to do with, you know, you give someone a pet, you give someone a dog, or even a cat, and that their devotion to us, particularly pack animals like dogs, is an incredible thing to restore us. And so to that 4-year-old, to Ivan, I'm sure he believed the dogs loved him. I'm sure they did. And that was probably for him the most functional family he'd ever had, and a totally loyal and loving family. And he survived the cold Russian winters by snuggling up to the dogs at night. They kept him warm, and he survived probably 2 Russian winters like that.
Yes, which is really amazing.
Remarkable, yeah.
Amazing, yes. Yes, I was thinking when I read the play, I'd just seen, I don't know if you've seen it as well, this the film that won the Cannes Film Festival by a Japanese director, and I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, but the film is The Shoplifters.
No, I haven't seen it.
Which is, again, a wonderful film. And again, you have this, definitely this functional family or atypical family, but of petty thieves, and you find out that they're not biologically related, and have sort of chosen each other or picked each other, and in a struggle to survive in a very tough situation. But they manage, because they have negotiated in a way their bond, they manage to give each other, to take from each other and to give each other things that they need. And this is something that really made me think about the meaning of this relationship with the dogs, which is in a way it's instinctual. I mean, but it's very. You could think of Ivan's story in terms of a regression into an animal, world, and this is how it's been depicted in the press, hasn't it? I mean, like he's been rescued from this.
Yes, I don't think he was rescued.
He wasn't rescued at all. I mean, it was a tragedy. But at the same, whereas he seems to have evolved a more complete, fulfilling, mature way of relating with other human beings. I mean, or with other beings, actually, not necessarily human. That you have to learn how to adjust, how to take and give. And
yes. I mean, it's written off that he carried on dreaming about his dogs. And now he's about 21, 22 now.
Oh, right.
Quite difficult to trace. It's been very difficult. He sort of turns up in the press, Soviet press, Russian press, every now and again, and then disappears again. But he went off, I think he's a sea cadet, and trained as that. He did get successfully fostered, which is not so common, I believe, in Russia. When I did some research in which entailed actually going to Moscow in 2005 and visited orphanages there. One really great, enlightened one maybe not so, I think. But we had discussions with the women that were running the centre there, and I don't know what it's like in Italy. In England, a lot of children are adopted into a family. It's not just fostering, that you're adopted, and there's usually a waiting list to adopt in England. Whereas in Russia, it's very rare that people adopt. They foster. And one of the women running the centre explained to us, and this is the more enlightened of the 2 orphanages. She explained to us that they feel, or then in 2005, it might be different now, but in 2005 they feel that the children are cursed.
Oh, really?
If they've lost their family because they've been abandoned. And that's why people won't adopt, they'll foster. And that was, for somebody from Western Europe, that was quite a hard thing to hear, because that's not attachment issues, that's not the way that certainly it would be looked at in Britain. That is condemning a child. It was heartbreaking, and that was the more enlightened of the 2 orphanages. It's a really startling thing to say. And of course, you know, when that collapse happened, there were so many street children, which there still are, as far as I know, in Russia, because there isn't the same resources that there are in England, even now, even with the conservative cuts that are going on, as regards children, where children can go that are orphans or that have run away. Okay.
Need to go and enjoy the performance. It's about. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for wonderful,
your time
very interesting questions.
Here, and I very much look forward to seeing this production.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you
very much.